Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Xing. Xing has had an on and off presence in SMITE's meta, being a decent damaging bruiser guardian with great CC but lacking in overall speed. Right now Xing is solid as either a support or a solo laner, and I'd say this guide is solid for both since his playstyle largely remains the same in both roles. One thing's different though, his builds. Support of course goes far tankier, and solo is still tanky with a splash of damage though, as his power scaling is on the higher side for a guardian. Relics wise, he definitely needs Blink. He has a great movement ability that may make you reconsider using it, but for me the character has never felt good without Blink. Second, Relic is dependent on your role. Shell is of course the all-rounder for Guardians, but Horrific Emblem is seen on him very often as well, thanks to him being a little slower and needing time to perform all of his abilities. What abilities? Well, I'm glad you asked. Every time Xing hits an enemy with an ability, he gains a stack of HP 5, this amount of HP 5 per stack being static throughout the game, and this passive can proc more than one time per ability. So a quick explanation, HP 5 is a base health regen in SMITE, and it stands for health per 5 seconds, so every 5 seconds you'll regen the value seen at the end of your health bar. Xing's passive simply adds up to 36 HP 5 at max stacks, and this is added to whatever his pre-existing HP 5 is, meaning with this passive stacked, Xing has a remarkable health sustain in the early and mid game with this passive stacked. So, since the amount is static throughout the game though, it is much more impactful in the early game than it is later on in the game. But in the early and mid game, you want more than anything to keep this passive at max stacks at all times. As we go through each ability, I'll touch on ways you can keep the passive up, but for now, just know that the passive persists for up to 18 seconds, and all of Xing's base ability cooldowns are under 18 seconds. That said, if you blow all of your abilities at once, chances are you won't have any enemies available to keep the passive up, hence the general playstyle of Xing being a little slow since you want to prolong trades if you can in order to keep this passive up for longer, as well as to use the sustain it gives you. One of the abilities that helps you stack this passive and prolong the fights is Xing's first ability. Xing deadass just kinda yells, and it's actually loud enough to hurt. All enemies hit by the shout take a base damage and then additional ticks of damage based off their maximum HP, with their basic attack damage as well taking a massive damage reduction, up to 50% with levels in this ability. So this is an ability with a lot of moving parts, but it's just as simple as this targeter would lead you to believe. For one, it's a very easy passive gainer, and try to clip enemy gods with it too if you can for an additional stack, not to mention the damage. It's a medium speed projectile that's great as both wave clear and poke alike, and is a must hit during trades thanks to its overall damage, having that base damage as well as dealing up to 14% of your target's max health at max level, not to mention that ridiculous basic attack damage reduction on top of that. Speaking of which, this goes from something that you want to place onto the wave or any god you can in the early and mid game to something you want to focus onto the enemy ADC in the late game. The basic attack damage reduction really is ridiculous, and you want to focus on hitting the enemy ADC if possible, which if you don't already know is something characters like Xing want to be doing in the late game anyways. But if you want to get accustomed to that playstyle, Xing is a good god to start with thanks to this basic attack reduction. Damage wise, well, the base damage is just okay, but that health damage is something that's consistently decent throughout the game. That said, while it's strong, any and all sustain, healing, lifesteal, etc. will very easily negate that damage. There's no such issue with Xing's second ability though. Xing knocks up all enemies within a cone in front of him, then roots all enemies in an AoE around him. So this is a bit like Amaterasu's third ability. There's essentially two abilities going on here. One ability that knocks up and one ability that roots. This works with his passive very well too, since both sections provide stacks individually, so Xing can easily hit 9 stacks for his passive off of just one ability. But of course you want to hit both sections of the ability onto a god if you can, as the CC and damage is second to none in the Guardian category. It's exceptional at stopping channeled abilities, as well as peeling multiple targets off of yourself and others, all doing it while moving. It's great. All you as a Xing player really need to do is get the timing of both sections and the range of the root down, and you're off to the races. This is yet another ability that benefits from quick casting so that you can learn the range, as using quick casting will keep the root's indicator visible to you whereas instant casting will not. The other thing to keep in mind though is that Xing is completely susceptible to CC while casting, so that root is far from confirmed if anyone on the enemy team has hard CC available. So in lane is extremely self-explanatory. Even if they can stop your Q's casting, they're not exactly going to be able to stop it if they're knocked up themselves. In teamfights of course, this isn't really going to fly, since most if not all gods on an enemy team will be able to stop it in one way or another. So you typically start with your ultimate ability for CC and use this later on in the fight, since starting off with it will often lead to you getting singled out, since you can't cancel out of the ability either once it's started. For safety in case you get called out though, Xing can rely on his third ability. Xing leaps forward and damages in a small AoE. Damaging gods with this ability grants Xing Chen a protections boost for a short time. Xing Chen has the ability to leap again within a 3-second window, and is able to cancel out of his second leap to recast abilities, relics, or simply basic attack, then reactivate for the second leap if there's still time remaining for it. So this breaks Xing wide open to a slew of possibilities. Aggression, safety, aggression and safety, it's great. For escaping, yeah, it's pretty simple. Just double leap pretty much anytime you need to get out of danger. Movement abilities like this aren't typically seen on Guardians, so make sure you make the most out of Xing's ability to leap over walls as well. Each leap as well counts towards Xing's passive. So if you've dropped your passive, an easy way to get it back up again is bunching up the wave, leaping on it and wanting it. Then you can leap on it again or simply leap away to safety. Mastering this ability will take time, but for the most part just mastering cancelling your second leap into a basic attack or a usage of your second ability and still having enough time to leap again is what's vital. And of course, given that you get a protections boost upon hitting an enemy god, this is how you want to engage on most lane opponents. Again, comboing into your other abilities, then using that second leap for follow-up if what you did led to good damage, or using the second leap to get away if say you missed an ability or got your 2 cancelled. The leaps do cover a good distance, but in the late game teamfights it's going to be all about starting off with your blink ultimate. Xing becomes CC immune and gains movement speed, spinning around 3 times, grabbing and damaging any enemies hit by the ability, then throws them, dealing additional damage. So, like Ares' ult before him, an absurdly good ability, when it lands. Just like with Ares' ult, while this can be a great decider in teamfights, it's oftentimes relegated to the Great Beads burner instead. How you use the ultimate is very similar though. You always want to go for squishy targets, and if you snag a tank or 2, it's no problem so long as you grab a squishy along with them, and then of course throw them towards your team. Be quick on your feet though, as sometimes you may grab a tank and a squishy, only to have the squishy beats out of your ultimate late, leaving you throwing a tank right into your team. But all you have to do is flick your camera away, and then you can have the opposite effect and throw that tank away from your team. So this ultimate gives you a bit more options than Ares' ultimate, not to mention damage. The ability hits for a 525 base damage if you hit every spin, with a crazy 175 scaling on top of that. And just like with Ares, if the CC portion is immune, the damage will still go through and is absolutely worth piling on. Again, like with Ares, you need to blink ult as many targets as you can to start off a fight, but with Xing, you need to quickly assess who has immuned and who has been picked up by your ultimate, and decide whether to throw them towards or away from your team, which can be tricky in high intensity situations. Also tricky is, well, hitting it, as the AoE is actually relatively small, so you're going to have to get a good blink as well as utilize that movement speed to get in nice and close to get that grab. It's disheartening when the ability gets immune, but remember, your ultimate is always going to be a lower cooldown than their beads, so whoever uses their beads to get out of that ultimate, just go straight for them next time. That's the late game though. In the solo lane, this ability is even more useful as a tool to totally ruin someone's day. Never ever forget about Xing's ability to chuck people under his own tower, and while plenty of solo lane gods are able to immune the ultimate with their own ultimate, many of them will be outlasted by Xing's, and thanks to the high damage on it, it'll still take a good chunk of their health, as well as forcing out their ultimate. Of course, there's plenty of ways to combo into whoever you threw with this ability yourself, so let's get to them. For ability leveling, you want your 1 at level 1, your 3 at level 2, and your 2 at level 3. From there you max your 1, your 2, then your 3, leveling the ult whenever you can. Xing is a powerhouse of a Guardian, with great CC and great damage on top of that, with one of the best movement abilities in the Guardian class. And once you manage to master that passive, it's extremely hard for him to get truly behind in the solo lane. And in that respect, he's one of the best lane controllers in the solo lane in the early game. And the same goes for the duo lane too. It can feel almost impossible to be aggressive into him since he just sustains everything you dish out back up. But as the game goes on though, and you have to leave those 1-on-1 and 2-on-2 situations, you really have to rely on your ultimate to confirm kills for both yourself and your team. And you most certainly can't just use your second ability and hope that you don't get interrupted. And relying on the ultimate comes with a share of downsides as well, since there are a ton of characters out there, both in the mage and hunter categories, that can immune Xing's ultimate with their own ultimate, with minimal impact on their teamfight effectiveness. So as the match goes on, fights are less and less determined by Xing himself and rather what your team can follow up with once Xing has done his bread and butter combos. Still though, catch one squishy out with your ultimate and they are guaranteed dead, and there's very few characters in the game outside of the mage class that can actually outtrade him effectively if you use Xing to his full potential. So try to learn as many combos and matchups as you can with Xing, all the while playing around his passive, and you'll have a great time with him. That's all I have on Xing for now. Thanks for watching. There's no such issue. There's no such issue as. There's no such issue. Holy fuck.